So we're actually part of an editorial collective of a journal that was just released earlier this year. It's called Selfies of Now, Directions in Contemporary and Modern Art in Asia. Basically, what this journal does is to sort of look at modern and contemporary art from a historical sort of perspective, right? Oh, okay, there you go. This is the physical copy of the journal, but actually the first two issues will, this is the first issue, the first two issues will be made available online for free. So, yeah, okay. So I don't know, I mean, I don't want to sort of talk too much about it, but do you want to sort of maybe briefly sort of tell everyone what's in the first issue?
Okay. Okay, so we're sort of jumping all over the place here, but hopefully it makes some sense. So what you're looking at here is the table of contents for the first issue, this one. And I suppose, without running through every contribution there, what I would draw your attention to is the kind of the diversity of geographical, historical, and also methodological kind of approaches that we see here. So the first essay there is an essay by Professor Patrick Flores. He's talking about two different approaches to the idea of avant-garde in Manila, in the Philippines, from the 60s through to the 80s. One approach to the avant-garde is the kind of the way that we usually understand it, as a politically oppositional form of artistic practice. And the other approach to the avant-garde is very much the opposite. It's a state-sanctioned, top-down kind of mobilizing of the aesthetics and the rhetoric of avant-garde, but very much not for an oppositional purpose. So you can see already that the geography here is the Philippines, the time period here is the kind of post-war nation-building era, and the methodology here is art historical, but very much based in a kind of discursive analysis. To skip down to skip across perhaps to the interview at the top of the second page there. This is an interview done by Pamela Corey with an American art historian called Stanley O'Connor, who was one of the pioneers of the study of Southeast Asian art in the American Academy. His field of expertise ranges right across the region, mainland and maritime Southeast Asia, and he talks about a range of methodologies, starting with archaeological kind of approaches, right through to analysing the markets for contemporary art that have emerged over the past decade or so. So in conceptualising this journal, we very much wanted to be able to be a broad church, if you like, to be open to such a range of geographical, historical and methodological approaches. But as Simon's already sort of mentioned, the one thing that kind of ties these diverse approaches together is an emphasis or a grounding in the historical. And that's something that we insist on from our contributors, whether they're looking at modern art, so-called modern art, which, you know, the definitions can vary, but which is generally considered to be historical in nature, or whether they're looking at something called contemporary art, you know, whether it be even in the art of the last decade or so. Regardless of whatever else differs amongst them, that emphasis on the historical is sort of shared. But maybe we should jump back to looking at the sort of practicalities of how the journal works, and Lino can talk you through our website and stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, you can go on to the website southeastofnow.com, which is sort of like, once in a while, the depository of open calls and the published material itself, but we have another platform, Facebook, as we are all aware. So it's actually trying to get the community and the supporter and the followers to share materials related to academic opportunities and events concerning the topic of Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art. What did I have? Another slide? I think. Did I skip something? Yeah. All right. So yeah, we understand that the process to publish an academic journal is dry and long, And so we try to make it exciting as well. So along the way, we try to think it as sort of like points of activating over the course between the published edition. So far we have various events, and these will those kind of events are designed, with collaboration with our editorial members based in different cities, and to organize and arrange programs that are sort of like well fit with the context and audience in different local cities. So, for example, we have hosted a talk by Patrick at the Reading Room in Bangkok just before the launch, where he can introduce on the topic that he will publish. We had a soft launch in Singapore with NUS Press, because that's where our home publisher, with the talk by some of our advisors. And yeah, we continue to sort of like host events, talks, discussions that sort of still activate and roaming around the topic that we are currently discussing in the editions of the publication.
Maybe just to kind of quickly introduce who we are. The three of us that are here today are three members of a 9-person editorial collective. As you can see, all 6 other members of that editorial collective are women, so it's a strange coincidence that we are all men here today. And indeed, the vast majority of contributors to the first 2 issues, at least, of the journal are also women, which is an exciting sign for the future. As you can see, the editorial collective is spread in locations across the region and outside of it. Most of us are either current graduate students or have recently completed our graduate studies. Some of us also work as curators. Some of us also work in various other kind of capacities in our local contexts. We have an advisory board of senior scholars working in the field of Southeast Asian art history and outside of that field. People who have been our mentors, our advisors, our kind of intellectual role models, if you like. We are published, as I think I mentioned, by the National University of Singapore Press, which means that everything takes longer than it would otherwise. But it also means that we don't have to do the boring stuff like the layout and the copy editing and so on. And we're supported by the Cultural Centre at the University of Malaya. I suppose it looks like a really boring flowchart of the process of academic publishing, but I suppose we wanted to mention this for 2 reasons. One, because tonight's talk, it coincides with the workshop for art writers, so we wanted to sort of introduce what is distinctive about writing for an academic publication as opposed to writing for various other kind of settings, online or magazines. The most obvious thing that you can get from this flowchart is that there are many steps involved and that it takes a long time, more than a year from the initial call for papers until the writing appears in print. So I won't talk through those 8 various steps in any detail, but just to say that we issue a call for papers on a particular theme. We receive responses to that. Encouragingly, we received a large number of responses. We make our selections, and we also invite additional contributions to kind of complement the proposals that we receive. The next step is to find peer reviewers for those contributions. We generally try and assign 2 peer reviewers for each contribution, although sometimes there's more. And we generally try to match 1 senior scholar in the field with 1 younger scholar, a graduate student or a recently completed graduate student, so that each contribution gets a kind of a varied sort of perspective, 2 different kind of sets of eyes, if you like. I won't talk about that in more detail now, but I think Simon likes to talk about not so much the technicalities of this process, but more of a kind of intellectual underpinning for why we think it's worthwhile to do this kind of publishing. Taking more than a year, as I said, from the call for papers to something appearing in print means that it's impossible for us to respond to the kind of urgencies that are so often bandied around in curatorial discourse in particular. And that has its disadvantages, of course, but I think it also has some advantages that set us aside from other publications in the field.
I detest urgencies. I find it very sort of problematic sort of like concept, and I think we need to sort of like also think of how the things we write about, the things we invest our time into, sort of thinking through certain sort of issues are allowed to sort of like simmer, are allowed to. We're allowed to have such a more sort of like measured response that would have a longer lasting sort of like impact, right? So a part of why we, for our generation at least, why some of us are turning back to this really old school sort of model that does not sort of like respond almost to the immediacy of like all the sort of like social sort of political sort of like issues. With such sort of like immediacy is that we want to sort of create a space for a different sort of like kind of reflection to take place. We recognize that there are actually a lot of journals that are around that would facilitate that very immediate sort of like response and reaction, whether it's through sort of like exhibition making or in journals or in the blog sort of platforms or in social media, in fact. How do we in this day and age then sort of create a platform where a different kind of reflection can take place is what we are very keen to sort of foster.
I wanted to say a bit because, you know, in the background of this is the writing workshop that I'm facilitating with Hiroyuki, and it really is, you know, a counterpoint. You know, when you emphasize the historical reflection and that kind of perspective that comes from giving it some time to see in historical context, that's not exactly what we're addressing in our workshop. So this is a very important kind of horizon. So Roger, you know, mentioning the kind of process, what I also find interesting to note is like a double-blind peer review. It's not just peer review, but it's also, you know, so it's quite rigorous. So this kind of rigorous rigor is something that we're not necessarily addressing in the workshop, but it's very important then to have this perspective complement what we're doing. So thank you for that.
No, but I think it's also very encouraging. It might seem like, you know, having the whole blind peer review sort of process might seem very daunting. Like you don't know who is the person who's actually reading your text, who's actually critiquing your text, but the editorial sort of process is one that is about guidance as well, where we work through with the authors about how to sort of like craft the essay into something that is a lot more readable, that has a lot more sort of like that has a sort of like stronger argument to make. So the whole process of taking 1 year is not just about going through all these sort of like steps, but also having to work very closely with the contributor.
It's not bureaucratic, but it's an intellectual labor.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there's some unfortunate bureaucratic things, and so when Lino mentions NUS publishing, and I laugh, it's because, you know, too often it's not that's not intellectual work. It's bureaucratic. But I think that kind of emphasis of the art historical work does take time.
Yes. I realize that we're talking in this particular occasion of the writers' workshop, and so while the journal focuses on having a consolidated platform for rigor and the historical reflection, we understand that there's a need for conversation as well. So the journal itself not only welcome academic articles, but we also welcome different sort of proposals and writings. So including some sort of responses, artist page, interview, and we want to see it as more try to be open as well to other sort of kind of materials. but still we want to put the emphasis and focus on the academic and intellectual reflection.
I suppose one other thing to say about that is that part of our vision for the journal, part of what we think is its purpose is to act as a resource for teaching and studying of Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art. At a time where more universities within the region are starting to find ways to teach art history, and more universities outside of the region are starting to look at this part of the world, it's becoming more and more apparent that the core texts that have been written about Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art history have been written either in journals of Southeast Asian studies, where they're the one and only thing about art, or else have been written in art journals that otherwise have no interest in Southeast Asia or even Asia. And so collecting the kind of scholarship that is already happening in this field under one kind of umbrella, I think will be important as we move forward for teaching and studying of the art history of this region. But another thing to add, I think, is that, which has been really surprising and encouraging, is that among our most avid readers have been artists in Southeast Asia. There are so many contemporary artists working today with an interest in history and art history. We've found that artists often have more patience for reading academic texts than academics do.
But also, we're also trying to say that art history doesn't need to be the boring kind of art history that we normally think of art history to be, right? I mean, art history can be critical. Art history can be sort of like versatile. It can come in different kinds of like, they can use sort of like different methodological sort of like tools in order to sort of look at this question of modern and contemporary as both sort of like time categories and sort of like mental frameworks. And that's what we want to sort of like encourage, is to sort of create more sort of inclusive sort of conversation of what can be about modern and contemporary sort of like art in Asia. We don't just focus on what fine art. We look at architecture. We're open to sort of like to this idea of the modern and contemporary that is not just from the 19th to the 21st century, but we think of this sort of like these two sort of like time frameworks as sort of flexible. It could sort of go back further into the past or go further or hurtle further into the future. It's something that we are sort of we're open to sort of like experimenting with in the journal.